Thank you, Evan, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. We're so glad you're here for the GLR Learning Tuesday webinar titled Building Parent Power, Fostering a Movement of Informed Learning Agents. Excuse me. Today's discussion will be the first in a mini series focused on the absolutely essential role of parents and caregivers in ensuring equitable learning recovery and shifting the trends in data on student progress we have seen lately. Our next session will be on November 21st, so please stay tuned for more information in your inboxes about that session. And as many of you know, when the campaign was launched over 10 years ago, largely in reaction to the seminal Kids Count report titled Early Warning, Why Reading by the End of Third Grade Matters, we have advocated that parents are a child's first and most important teacher who, as the report illuminated, need to be encouraged and enabled to play indispensable roles as co-producers of good outcomes for their children. Yet it seems that many school systems have not fully tapped into the power and potential of parents and instead narrowly focus on prescriptive asks and tasks and not on building authentic relationships. These kinds of strong and functional relationships between teachers and school staff and parents are what makes space for parents to exercise their innate power and leverage their deep knowledge of what makes their children successful. But fortunately, there are multiple organizations focused on informing and organizing parents so that they can exercise their innate power to establish true partnerships with schools and act as agents of change and advancement in their children's learning. Our colleagues at Bellwether recently published a report profiling several parent power organizations and surfacing lessons that are broadly applicable to organizations interested in expanding their reach and impact on behalf of parents, students, and communities. And so today we are very lucky to have the chance to engage in conversation with Alex Cortez of Bellwether, one of the authors on the report, and learn why parent and community power is so important for changing education systems and achieving learning recovery for students. He will dive into the effective strategies that local organizations employ to authentically build agency among parents and how local communities can best use this information highlighted in their report to advance their own support of parent power and build a movement of parents and schools partnering for students. We also have the opportunity to learn from other national leading parent power organizations, including Learning Heroes and Parents for Public Schools, along with local organizations profiled in the report, including Faith Acts for Education in Connecticut and Kids First Chicago, and along with our partner in the state GLR network from the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning. So all of these discussions will be moderated by our fabulous GLR Executive Fellow, John Gompertz. So if you have been with us before, you know we are in for a super engaging discussion. John was previously the president and CEO of America's Promise Alliance, and prior to that, John served as director of AmeriCorps in the Obama administration and had a long career with nonprofits and government organizations devoted to civic engagement. And he's an outstanding moderator, as many of you know. And I'm now honored to welcome and briefly introduce our esteemed panelists with us today in alphabetical order. And please note that we've already posted full bios linked in the chat, and we'll repost them again. So I'm just quickly previewing who we have with us today. So first we have Daniel Anello, who has served as CEO of Kids First Chicago since 2015. Anello brings deep quantitative analytical skills and authentic lived experience to his role in supporting parent-led and data-informed change within Chicago's public schools. He partners with families to help them gain the resources, information, access, and voice they need to achieve their vision for their children's education. Juanisha Evans-Clark leads the team responsible for organizational strategy, finance, operations, executive support, and talent at Faith Acts for Education in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Throughout her career in public education, Juanisha has ensured the recruitment and retention of Black educators and has forged partnerships between national organizations like Teach for America and the United Negro College Fund, among many others. Alex Cortez is a partner with Bellwether in the strategic advising practice area. Alex has 9 years of experience working in education and social change as a consultant, a school operator, and in philanthropy. Prior to joining Bellwether, Alex was a managing partner with New Profit and National Venture Philanthropy, and also led an initiative to scale efforts that supported parents in exercising their innate power to create and sustain change. We also have Shana McIver. She is Senior Director of Learning and Practice with Learning Heroes. She has over 25 years of experience in education, spanning pre-K, K-12, and family services. A former elementary school teacher, Shana most recently was the family engagement director with Baltimore City Schools, where she took pride in being the voice of families as a district leader. Joanne Mickens is executive director with Parents for Public Schools, a national organization headquartered in Jackson, Mississippi, focused on advancing the role of families and communities in securing a high-quality public education for every child. Before joining PPS, Joanne taught history and civics first in Richmond, Virginia, and then in Warrensville Heights, Ohio. And finally, Bridget Radojak is the Child and Family Development Supervisor at the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning and the CDC's ACT Early Ambassador for Georgia. She provides support for early childhood professionals and families on the topics of developmental monitoring, child development, and family engagement. So welcome to all of you. We are so looking forward to learning and engaging with you today. And so now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John Gompers to get our conversation going.
Thanks, as always, Emily. Great setup. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. We have a big crowd and we're really excited to get into this conversation. As we start today, let me once again acknowledge the situation in the world. There is much pain and anger and uncertainty in so many families and so many communities. What we're discussing today is super important, of course, but we also have to put everything we do and everything we talk about in the context of what's happening in the broader world, and I wanted to acknowledge that as we start. With that, Alex, let me invite you to join on screen. And this is fun for me because we've had some of these conversations offline, and now we get to take this conversation public. So I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with you. And I want to start with, let's start at the beginning or even before the beginning. Tell us why you and why Bellwether is so interested in the role of parents.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen.
You have some cool slides to share with us, so I'm psyched for that.
Well, that's the obligatory consulting thing. We PowerPoint is our love language. I want to start by thanking the campaign for having us join today. I want to thank my co-authors, Krista Kaput and Kelly Foster, who really did the bulk of the writing on the case studies. And I very much want to thank the leadership, staff, and parent leaders of Kids First Chicago, Faith Acts for Education, Go Public Schools, Innovate Public Schools, and DC PAVE for really being willing to share their wisdom and candor with all of us. And I hope we represent it well today. A little forewarning for the PowerPoint comment. There are some slides with a lot of words. That is specifically so people have this as a leave behind and can get value out of it when I'm not here narrating. So to John's point, I'm going to start with a little bit of the personal. So in 2014, I left the charter sector and joined a Boston-based but nationally focused venture philanthropy called New Profit. And when I arrived, several of our board members said, look, you're a charter guy. We love the impact charters have had, but they're not really changing systems. Why and what can we do about it? And that really set me on a journey of both learning and unlearning. And I think where I've arrived at the current moment is that over the past 3 decades, education entrepreneurs, students, and parents have demonstrated that with the right innovations, all children can learn and succeed. And I have that little asterisk around parents because I'm using parent as a shorthand of any adult who is responsible for the education and future of their child, no matter their biological relationship. But I wanted to use one word as a shorthand, so I'm using parent, others use family, totally makes sense. I think, however, what we've found is that we've also discovered that the supply of these education innovations can't reach their full potential because of political and policy barriers that inhibit what I call actionable demand. And I use that term deliberately and separately from what I would call latent demand, because there's widespread latent demand for great schools. All communities care about the education and future of their children, which is probably not something I need to necessarily say to all the people on this call. But one of the things I discovered was the amount of implicit and explicit bias towards parents and communities in the communities we purport to serve. So I'm always very direct. All parents care about the education and future of their children, but caring isn't power. If you are, oh, there we go. If you are in a failing school system and you lack the economic power to move or the personal and political power to drive change, you're stuck. So for me, going from latent demand to actionable demand is unapologetically about power. And to Emily's point, how do we inform and organize parents so they can exercise their innate power individually and collectively to drive and sustain change. And here's how I think I've learned this works. First, you have to think about informing. Parents and communities do not try to solve problems or seize opportunities they don't know they have. And there's huge disparity of information, particularly for systemically marginalized communities, about the performance of their students and children and their schools. So this information piece starts with, what does a good school look like? And are you getting it? Second, what are the policies and politics driving that disconnect? And third, what are practices to immediately support learning and action? And some organizations focus just on informing, and that has great intrinsic value. Others take the next step and organize. They organize parents as individuals, they organize them as a community, and for a subset, they organize them as leaders of their community. And I think when parents are informed and organized, they can exercise their innate power 4 ways. First is as partners in education, both in schools that want that partnership or through out-of-school resources. The second is exercising the power of their choice, and not just a simplistic choice between school A and school B, but all the choices you make on nearly a daily basis on behalf of your child. And both of those parents' power strategies are really about how you get the most out of the existing system. The third strategy is exercising the power of collective voice through issue campaigns. And the fourth is exercising the power of their vote through electoral activism. And that's really how you change the way the system operates in some way. And what we have found in observing this, both in my former role in philanthropy and now in consulting at Bellwether, is that these strategies are distinct, but they're mutually reinforcing. So some organizations just start with strategy 1 and 2, and that has intrinsic value on learning and benefit to students. But what can also lead to is a realization that there are things that need to change. And so the example, for instance, in this could be helping parents understand that if their children are ready, they should take AP courses. But what do you do if you are in a school that doesn't offer AP at all? So part of what 1 and 2 can do is not only drive intrinsic value for students, but also build understanding, power, and the agenda to drive systems change, which then brings you to strategy 3 and 4, issue or electoral work. But as I think we'll hear from some of our examples in the panels today, even once you've been successful in changing the way the system operates, you then need to come back to strategy 1 and 2 to make sure parents are able to fully avail themselves of changes that benefit. And of course, you can enter into any of these strategies in any order or combination. 3 quick trends on this, though, is that we've seen, 1, organizations who are working with hundreds or thousands of parents getting that perspective into a problem in the system. So, if you're working with 500 or 600 parents, helping them navigate a special education system, you're providing benefit in 1 and 2, but you might also identify there's a problem in the special education system that they can only address through collective action. And that leads you into, issue or electoral work. Trend 2, and I've seen a lot of this in my former charter brethren, is you run into a political obstacle and you're like, oh, we need to organize parents for this. But if you haven't developed a deep, authentic relationship in strategy 1 and 2, which is where parents are going to spend the vast majority of their time with you as a school leader, they're not going to probably want to fight your fight because it's not their fight. Conversely, organizations who have deeply invested in 1 and 2 have found that when they encounter the need to take on issue or electoral work, parents will take it on because it's their vision of an agenda being advanced. And then the final trend on this page is simply that a lot of organizations are realizing they need to get involved in school board and electoral activity, and that does not require having a C4. There's a lot organizations can do in this space far short of having a C4, and some of them also have a C4 to get involved explicitly in electoral campaigns. And one just note on, I know I've been talking a lot about parents. When I started this work, I was very much focused on parent power for some specific reasons. Too often, well-intentioned education efforts discount parents out of a misguided belief that if parents were part of the solution, they would have already addressed the problem. And so what you see is people diagnosing the power imbalance and then inadvertently perpetuating it. And I think as Matt Hammer, the founder of a preeminent parent organizing group, once said, we have this uncompromising belief in the infinite capacity of every child to learn, grow, create, be brilliant, and lead. We have to have the same belief around their parents. Or as a parent organizer, said to me years ago, my mother says if you're not part of the huddle, you're not in the game. Parents are not in the game. We're on the sidelines. We want to know how to get in. And of course, coming out of COVID, a lot of dynamics have come into play on this. And then I do think all 4 of those strategies are equally true in organizing students, teachers, and other community members. As the leader of an organization called 4.0 has said, just like parents know their kids better than other adults, kids are also learning every day, often in school, how to know themselves better than anyone else. They deserve to be at the main table of education reform, not the kids' table. Speaking, last, John, to your question, I'll pause around Bellwether. I think we're realizing that more and more organizations, be it district schools, charter schools, parochial, private schools, non-school education nonprofits, are really having to take a fresh look, if they already haven't had this in their mindset and values, around the role of parents in delivering education efforts and in driving change. And for some of them, it requires quite a shift in mindsets. And I think it also speaks to the fact that more and more are realizing that education efforts can't just focus on the supply side of a great innovation. It's not enough to just be righteous and have good results. You have to think about how to change systems. For philanthropy, I'd argue systems change is their only exit strategy. And I think the only way to change systems is for parents and communities to drive power.
Wow, that was fantastic, Alex. So much to dig into there. I loved your focus on power here, and I think we're going to want to dig into that more. But before we do that, tell us a little about what you found. You know, I see a lot of theory here and ideas and arrows that go this way and that way. What'd you find out in the field? What do you want us to know about that you took away from the 5 groups that you looked at?
Great question. And of course, there's a slide on that.
Naturally.
It says if we practice this. So I think 4 lessons really stood out, or 4 categories of lessons from the gift of the insights that these 5 organizations shared with us. The first one is develop a strong mission and vision that provides clarity about the work and then facilitates decision making. Organizations cannot do everything. And especially if you're a young organization getting involved in parent power and parent organizing, really understanding what are the first set of issues we want to think about taking on, and building power progressively over time as you have wins, as people see that they can exercise power to affect a change in with their student, with that student's classroom, with the school system. And that speaks a little bit to the second piece, which is establish structures to build power among parents and support their success. And so even with parent organizing groups, there is a risk of dictating the agenda to parents, not responding to the agenda set by parents. And so that is something we saw these organizations very successfully always keep front and center. And that comes back to as you're developing your initial agenda from point 1, what is it the parents say they want to drive change in their community? And I think one of the organizing lessons is when a group says they want to drive a change, don't judge if you think that change is too modest. Say, okay, if this is what you want, we're going to support you getting it. And so if parents say, look, we want clean bathrooms, don't say, well, you should want better schools. Say, look, we're going to help you clean up the bathrooms. And then once that's happened, now that you've seen you can exercise power, what's next? And if what the parents say is, we want to jump right to completely transforming the system, then you think about what a viable campaign is to do that. So much of this is about building relationships. Relationships are really not the cost of doing business. Relationships are the business. And so much of sort of establishing that power and supporting their success is really embracing relationships with parents. And there's a set of power moves. If you're trying to involve parents, like how do you actually legitimately think about involving them? I think this is true of schools and school boards as parent organizing, which is when you have events is important. Are you having something during the workday when most people are working? Where are you having it? Is it something far away from where people have access to? Are you providing transportation in the form of like access to mass transit or parking? Are you providing food? Are you providing childcare? Are you providing translation services? Are you willing to do things in multiple times and places to really lower barriers for participation? And if you're asking something significant of parents, where is there a way to think about compensation? The third one is approach staffing and organizational structures with a flexible mindset and a willingness to make changes over time. One of the things that we learned a lot from these organizations is that they went through different configurations. So some organizations have full-time professional organizers, that's all they do. Others realize that, everyone in our staff needs to be an organizer no matter what. And part of this is because organizing is very intense. It doesn't happen during the school day. It's usually nights and weekends when parents are available. That looks a little different when you're focusing more on the strategies of 1 and 2, helping parents engage in partnership or choice around education. But still, if you're meeting with parents, you have to think about when are they available and adapting to that, not asking them to adapt to you, because that's not going to happen. One of the things that these organizations share a lot about is their board composition. And boards are opportunity to bring in outside expertise and, of course, funders. But if it's a parent group serving parents in a community, a lot of these organizations really focus on the importance of having parents as members of the board in terms of governance, and how to manage the trade-off between some very different cultures that come together in a board, and much more on an emphasis of making sure the well-intentioned outsiders really make sure they bring their assets, but understand the assets of communities, and if necessary, do the work to build that credibility. And then some organizations have said, look, we had to completely reinvent ourselves and make some bold changes. So some multi-site organizations first organized on geography, then they organized by functional area, then they ended up in a matrix organization. And so as organizations grow, they need to be unafraid of making the changes as they realize what's working, what's not. And then the fourth one is build strategic relationships with funders and diversify revenue streams. And I think within this one, you want to have a strategy in place for identifying and building relationships with those funders who align with their mission and vision goals, but also be prepared to say no to funders who don't align. I think double clicking on that one, I think there's also a subtext of how do you bring funders on a journey of bringing them into proximity with the community, experiencing what this work looks like, so they really shift their awareness, their attitude, and eventually then their actions. And there's nothing more transformative than someone who is used to being in the majority going into an experience, including organizer training, and being the person who's the outlier and having to experience that. I think it's a really important growth for some of us. When possible, there are ways to think about diversifying an organization's base of funders. Some organizations, particularly in strategy 1-2 around partnership and choice, are much more able to engage in government funding. For those who are much more around issue and electoral work, there's a tension there because you don't want to have your agenda co-opted. And some are looking at earned income streams, particularly around training other organizations in how to do parent organizing or community organizing. And then always just come back to being deliberate and consistent in navigating power dynamics and making sure that funders are not the one driving your strategy.
Wow, that's just so much. I am glad that you did the slides. I'm glad you're going to leave them behind so that people can metabolize them. We have a lot of funders who join these calls, Alex, and you've been a funder before. I wonder what your key message for funders is as they think about supporting parent engagement efforts.
Absolutely. And a little of what I'm going to share both comes out of the essays and counsel from the 5 organizing groups, but also some work we've done differently, bringing in program officers from across 9 foundations and doing interviews with them to really understand their perspective on this type of space. And so one, I think it starts with shifting internal organizational mindsets about the role of parents in driving change. B, identifying and addressing internal implicit and explicit bias towards parents. And C, exploring when and where and how to cede power. And so this is where a lot of these program officers said, look, I sort of get this work, but I don't know how to shift the mindsets of my board or my leadership or my living principles to really think differently about this work. And so there is some internal work foundations need to think about doing to shift some of those mindsets and biases. And then a lot of this does come back to power, John, to the point you mentioned. And when I in my earlier days on this, I'm like, we don't need to cede power. Like, we have power, and parents and communities have power, and we need every erg of power. I looked it up. Erg is the measure of power. But I realized I was sort of kidding myself. If we want to, as philanthropists, make space for parents and communities to exercise their power, we are going to need to step back, particularly in the power to control the agenda. But as one parent organizer shared with me, you need to step back, but it doesn't mean you don't still step up. And again, it's how do we use our power when appropriate, but to support a community's agenda. 2, think differently about funding timelines and measuring impact. So this work is not a marathon or a sprint. It's a commitment to walk 10,000 steps every day, usually around the same track, and sometimes walking backwards because of the pushback you're getting from your opponents. And that doesn't match up well with funder strategies that usually fund in 1, 2, or maybe 3-year increments. Also is measurement, and measurement's a complicated thing. I have a link there to a set of resources we developed a couple of years ago with 18 parent organizing groups on how to think about measurement. I do think you can measure the space. I think it's complicated, but doable. I think most organizations, and this is not just true of parent groups, but in general, are incredibly results driven. Doesn't mean the same as measurement driven. So I do think there are a set of things, and I think funders, if they want to see organizations better measure, need to fund them to develop their skills and systems in measurement. Just really quickly in the last three, ensure parent-student community power is a consideration in a grant of every potential organization. David Flink, the founder of an organization supporting neurodiverse learners called Eye to Eye, once said, every supply side organization needs a demand side strategy. So you can argue that a funder can say to any grantee, irrespective of their model, what role do parents play in driving change? And if they don't have an answer, that tells you an answer. Look for opportunities to be thought partners and allies beyond just funding, but don't forget the funding. But there are things funders can do around advocating themselves, around introducing other funders. And then fifth, and very importantly, support organizations through leadership changes. And we are seeing this time and time again across the education sector, that successor leaders who are predominantly leaders of color are coming in, succeeding white founders, and funders then basically walk away. I don't know how funders think we're ever going to be successful in driving change if we're not willing to support leaders as they naturally transition in organizations. And just very quickly, the last slide is coming back to these four strategies. I think there are 6 different ways funders can think about what they fund.
I gotta capture a couple.
Nope.
I gotta make sure it's actually recording.
I think we're having a little programming problem,
Yep.
but we're just going to
keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going.
I
You're on
think
a hot
the
roll.
first 2 strategies around partners and choice. One, fund organizations that are in fact focusing on building parent power and choice, and so working directly with parents. Or 2, fund school and or program service providers that incorporate parents into their model to improve outcomes. And so there are a lot of education interventions out there that don't involve parents. I think it's an interesting question to say, what additional impact could you make if you did? And some organizations, like for instance, Springboard Collaborative, that's inherent in their DNA. On more of the collective voice and vote, so issue and electoral work, again, funding parent organizing groups that are building parent power to change systems. But again, fund schools or program and service providers to think about organizing parents, coming back to that David Flink quote, every supply side organization should have a demand side strategy. And then in terms of participatory philanthropy, where do you engage parents and communities in developing your strategy of what is funded? And then what role can they have in helping you, from a grant making perspective, decide who is funded?
Wow, that's just so much, Alex. I wanted to note the comment you made about fixing the bathrooms. I think there's often a misalignment. There's a lot of folks who are very interested in education reform and higher academic achievement and want to go straight there. And I think sometimes we experience with parents a different hierarchy of what's important, starting with things like safety. And those of us who are education reformers and supposed experts get very excited about other things when parents may be thinking about more fundamental things about their kids, particularly in communities that have all kinds of struggles.
Yeah, and I will say, one of the hardest things for philanthropists, but I think this is true from some practitioners, is that releasing the agenda. And I think we have to pivot that mindset. It's not how we invite parents to our table. It's what the work we do and build trust, so they invite us to their table. And it's not about us answering questions, but asking them. But that gets to the core of a lot of people's value. You think about most foundations, they were funded by rich people who got really rich, whatever their privilege in the beginning, by being really smart and out-analyzing the situation. Then they hire people at their foundation and they're smart and they out-analyze the situation. So their whole core value in the world, as they see their self-value, is analyzing to a solution. And it's very hard to shift that mindset to, this is not our job to analyze a solution for a community. It's our job to engage the community and how they analyze it.
Right. And we don't want to bad talk expertise either. It's this, how do you strike the right balance? How do you do the mix of all those things? And I think that's, always adjusting the dials, which is really what this your slides are about, being in conversation with and being willing to listen to others. I want to ask you one last question before we invite some others to the conversation. A lot of what we've been talking about in recent webinars, Alex, is that it's comparatively easy to make the case of what ought to happen and comparatively hard to do what ought to happen. That implementation is really where things often fall down. So people have all kinds of, they've got the right, quote unquote, ideas. They have all the right intentions. They may have resources, but then stuff doesn't happen or it smashes up. Tell us what you think about are the biggest challenges and barriers, and what the strategies are for going around those or over those challenges and barriers. And I want to come back to this conversation later when we talk to our experts who are with us today.
Yeah, there's probably a very long answer to that. I'm going to try and keep it short, so there's so many more voices to get in. But I would say, one, I think we have to approach change from the idea that education systems are not rational systems. They're political systems. They're a complex web of money, power, interests, and values. And if your innovation to get to scale is going to disrupt the status quo of money, power, interests, and values, systems are quite naturally likely to push back. And so I think the only way to offset that is informing and organizing parents and communities so they can exercise their power to drive that. But it comes back to this idea of like, it's not one and done, it's really forever. And you have to keep at it. Even when you win a policy win in a campaign, you then need to have yet another campaign to make sure that policy is implemented. You know, as someone said to me, implementation is where systems change goes to die.
Yes.
So you can't just get a policy change. You have to be there to continue to be both a partner, a persuader, and if necessary, a pressure to make sure the system actually implements the changes intended. You may need to run yet another issue campaign to ensure that parents and communities are aware of the change and start to adopt it. And only then can you hope to then start to see the change enacted and measure student outcomes.
Yeah, I really agree with that. This combination of ongoing support with accountability around change, particularly when we get into the implementation stage. You know, you think it's the hard thing is to win the policy or the practice, but in fact, the hard thing is to implement that with some level of fidelity and flexibility over a longer period of time to sustain that. Thanks so much, Alex. We're going to come back to you in a little while, of course, but let us now bring in Shana and Joanne to bring us the perspective from the perch of a couple of national organizations working on parent engagement. Shana, I'm going to come to you first. Learning Partners is a key partner. Learning Heroes is a key partner to the campaign. So we're pretty familiar with your work, and we know you've got a report coming out soon. Heads up to everybody who's listening. We'll have a session with Learning Heroes on November 21st. So get that on your calendars right now. So Shana, tell us a little about Learning Heroes and about your reaction to the report and findings that Alex just described.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to join the conversation, John. One of our local Go Beyond Grades campaigns just officially launched in St. Louis. And for those who don't know what Go Beyond Grades is, it's an effort that is intended to help families team up with their teachers. And it's getting lots of great exposure in the cities where we're partnering. Our family engagement impact study is available on our website, but basically the focus is investigating the relationship between pre-pandemic family engagement and current student and school outcomes. And that's garnering a lot of attention as well. So please go to our website and check the study out. I'm excited to share that our cohort 2 of our Family Engagement Leadership Institute, we call it FELI, starts tomorrow. This 9-month institute equips school principals and district administrators to lead family engagement strategies that directly impact student learning and well-being. I'm honored to have joined the team just a few months ago, to co-lead that strategy with Dr. A.L. Bergman. We're also offering some exciting teacher PD opportunities across the country with school districts that want to build their staff's muscle, right, around how family and school partnerships can yield increased achievement and student success. So that's just a snapshot at a very high level of some of what I would call very compelling work that we're doing. This is exciting times for Learning Heroes.
Fantastic. So what'd you think about the report that Alex talked about, Jana? What's your reaction? And I'm
Well,
going to
I
ask
enjoyed
you,
it.
I'm going to ask you, first I'm going to ask you to wear your Learning Heroes hat. Then I'm going to ask you to turn
Absolutely.
it around and put on your hat from your experience in Baltimore.
Will do, will do. So there were a couple of core inspirations for me from the report, right? The importance of declaring a vision and mission. While Learning Heroes, right, is a national organization, a lot of significant time and energy into developing our vision and mission that's focused on the promise of equity and articulates where we're going, puts a stake in the ground for how we're going to get there. It helps us in decision making, right, to determine what we're going to do, what we're not going to do, and the impact we want to have. And it also helps us guide our collaboration with trusted partners in the work. The other thing that resonated with me was embracing a flexible mindset. Reading that, I really enjoyed reading the studies and reports there. You know, embracing a flexible mindset truly can't be overstated, especially for entities like ours, national organizations, but even local school systems, right? While it's important to make plans and set goals, we're also in a time where nothing is necessarily predictable. And the ability to be nimble, right, can make all the difference in the world. As a former family engagement director, Baltimore City Public Schools, I have been a part of creating policies and plans that include research-based strategies and, however, if we want to ensure that active family participation takes place, we got to be open to creative ideas, to culturally relevant input, hearing from the people, right? And developing those plans and also assessing the effectiveness of our implementation. I knew we had to include families from the start and throughout, which means being open to ideas and priorities that could slightly differ from, right, those of the district.
That is super helpful. Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you shortly, but that is great input. Now, Joanne, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get to your reactions to the Bellwether report, tell us a little bit about Parents for Public Schools and your work to equip parents to be active partners with schools and teachers.
Well, I brought a few slides along. If
I just happen to have some slides.
So let's roll.
Oh, let's roll through them.
Let's roll,
Let's keep moving because we got more people we want to engage.
Of course, if the slides don't come up, I can talk about Parents for Public Schools until the cows come home. It's an organization that's been around for over 30 years. And for much of that time, I've been a member of Parents for Public Schools, and I actually became a staff member back in 2006. And one of the things well, many things about what Alex said struck me, but what really struck me was a sense of relief that when he put up those 4 things that nonprofits, the characteristics that nonprofits should have, I started making a list and checking off and saying, we're doing pretty good. We have a strong mission and vision. And over the years, we revisited our mission. And I think that today we have one that we are a chapter organization. We have chapters around the country. And our chapters a few years ago demanded that we move beyond in our mission statement, talking only about parents, and that we begin to include families and communities. There we go. Okay, could you move it ahead like 2 or 3? So we have, well, not that fast. Can you back up? I see why Alex wanted to run the show himself now. But there's our mission. We were founded in Jackson, Mississippi over 30 years ago, and we're still headquartered here. We have 9 chapters in 7 states, and you see them listed there. And one of the things mentioned about flexibility, one of the key aspects of PPS is that each chapter, though they follow the national mission, they can focus on issues that are really relevant in their own school districts and communities. And trust me, that requires flexibility, because that means then that we got to understand what's happening in school districts around where our chapters are located around the country, and also be willing to listen and to support what they feel are the things that they need to be doing in order to address concerns in their communities. All right, we can move along. So we have 3 focus areas. First of all, education and information. And when Alex talked about power, knowledge is power. And so one of the things PPS has concentrated on from the very beginning is that parents, if they're going to be real partners in the education of their children, they've got to have information. And so they need to understand the jargon, they need to understand the accountability plan, they need to understand testing and why this test and why are we doing this. They need to understand the 3rd grade reading gate. And so education and information is something that we focused on from the very beginning. We also have focused on leadership and membership development. Numbers make a difference. There's this old quote that we use in our parent training that one person is a fruitcake, one parent is a fruitcake, 2 parents are a fruitcake and a friend, 3 parents are troublemakers, and it goes on until you've got enough people where they've got to pay attention to you. And so education and information, leadership development, but also advocacy and organizing. Numbers make a difference. And so our way of doing this is organizing. There are many ways we do it, but a chief way is through development of chapters around the country. And we, when parents, schools, and communities work together, everybody wins. All right. Next slide. And so the PPS brand of parent engagement, we believe that parents are equal partners in the education of their children. And that's why equipping them with the information, knowledge, tools, techniques that they need so that they can sit down at the decision-making tables, that they're not just bringing cookies to school, and Lord knows we need cookies at school, but we also want them making key decisions about the education of their children. We want parents to not only point out problems, we want them to suggest answers. We want them to be effective in making decisions. And if they raise standards, we're going to help schools raise them. We don't want to dumb down. We want to serve as mentors to other parents. We're absolutely committed to diversity, but going a step further, last year we issued our equity statement to make it very clear that we want equity for all children and all families. Yeah. And that is the way we operated, but we never put it down in black and white before. And now we do have an equity statement. And of course, we are community advocates, not just school district advocates, but advocates for the communities in which our school districts are located. And then
Joanne, I want to, well, go ahead quickly, but I want to get to your reaction to okay. Alex, the report that Alex.
And this will be the last thing I'll share. Okay. A few years ago, we felt that the best way to inform parents, to help them become the partners that they need to be in their children's education, was to provide training. And so today we have a parent engagement curriculum. It's called the Parent Engagement Program, or PEP, and it's designed to give parents what they need in order to be effective partners. And we have 3 curricula, and our most recent one is our early childhood development curriculum, which recognizes that parents are their children's first teachers. So let's give them some things, some skills, some knowledge that they can use in the home so that they can be effective as those, more effective as those first teachers. All right, I'll stop there. No more slides. And
excellent.
John, what's your question?
Well, I want to get your quick reaction to what Alex has found. Alex and his colleagues found in their study of these 5 organizations around the country. What popped for you? What stood out for you?
The things several things stood out, but he said that one of the problems, even when parents recognize that they have power, is how do they get in? How do they get to the table? How do they learn to utilize that power?
Yeah.
So that's what our work is designed to do. It's designed, and our chapters, the work that we do in communities, there is just this innate belief that we have a place there. And so one of the things we ask our chapter leaders to do is to build relationships with community leaders. This recognition that parents are leaders too. So we want them to know the key people, not only in the school district, but the key people in their town. That we want them to know the leaders of other organizations that are essential to successful schools. So that's one thing he mentioned, was how do we get in? And we help parents to get in, and through our PEP training, we have parents who are now sitting on school boards. We've had a parent who was in the state legislature. So our parents can apply what is learned to get to the table and the decision-making table. So that was one of the things that there were many that he mentioned. He also mentioned, and I think that the fact that we require that we ask our chapter leaders to build relationships gets to his comment about these strategic relationships that he mentioned. But before my time runs out, I want to talk about what he said about funders.
Go.
There is no small nonprofit like Parents for Public Schools that doesn't have the ongoing struggle to fund the really good work that we do. Nonprofits do the work that nobody else is doing. And I think we do it well. And I believe that there are great people out there who have lots of money, who have contributed to us over the years. But I think that, as was pointed out in Alex's comments, there needs to be a very fundamental shift or enhancement of their understanding of the importance of parent engagement, because parent engagement is important to public education. Public education prepares our leaders, our citizens, our parents, so that it's really absolutely fundamental to the success of our society and our democracy. So to me, understanding the value of parent engagement, I think I would like to see our funders have a little bit more respect for that.
All right, that is super helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to now bring in our last group of commenters who are going to come to us from a local and state level. Thank you to Joanne, and don't go far. Also, the same with Alex and with Shayna. We're coming back. So now we want to hear from three people who are doing this work at the community level. Daniel, let's start with you and Kids for Chicago, which is featured in the Bellwether report. Can you give us just a brief description of the approach that you've been taking in Chicago?
Sure, and I'll be tight as I can be.
Go ahead. No, we want to.
No, I heard a ton of things I would love to respond to, but we'll get.
You're getting your chance. Don't worry.
Yeah,
don't worry.
yeah.
Don't
I was like, oh no, I appreciate a lot of things to
just
share, but
lay down some basics for us, and then
absolutely
we'll get your reactions.
So we're really wedded to this notion of working in deference to parents in the school system in Chicago. Black and brown moms and dads have been systemically boxed out of engaging in their schools in a way that we often take for granted how parents in more affluent school districts engage on a daily basis. I would ask everyone who's at this call to just pause for a second and think about what we think of as high performing school districts in this country, and go back to some of the comments made about the intrinsic motivation of parents to see their kids succeed and have every opportunity in front of them. And just think about how parents engage there. Like, they have power, they have a natural seat at the table. There isn't even a question about it. And then we go to a place like Chicago, or we go to LA, or we go to anywhere where we have, I would say, disinvestment in communities and structural racism over a century plus, and Black and brown moms and dads are boxed out. And we often blamed them in the past. And I think we're finally coming around to realizing, wait a minute, academic outcomes are better if parents are engaged. So just starting there, but more importantly, that if they have innate power, they make much more durable solution decisions and decisions that aren't rooted in people's ideology or political ideology. They're thinking about their own children. And so their decisions are more durable and they cut through a lot of the politics. But the reason we exist, Kids for Chicago, is to give them the microphone and to get out of the way. Our job is to help them be successful in achieving whatever they tell us they want to pursue. So they have the agenda. But I think also to just touch on something that was said, their agenda is not blind to the expertise that is out there. We want them to have the information, like Joanne was talking about, that they need to make informed decisions. But at the end of the day, they're telling us where to go. And that is our model. We work very closely with the district. We work with whoever, frankly, the city, whoever the issue lies with. That's who we're helping parents get in front of and push for change with them and following that through implementation. So that's Kids for Chicago is.
Talk a little bit about the how, Daniel. How do you do that?
It starts with having legitimate ways to provide service to families and build authentic relationships. So when we first started, we were just coming into communities and we didn't have a relationship necessarily. First of all, our staff is all from or connected to or has history from the neighborhoods we're in. So that is important, I think. But you're still a newcomer. You're not necessarily someone who has kids in the school in that moment in time. We do have parents on our staff that do. But essentially our initial starting point was, how do we help people find schools? What are the core kind of pain points that the individual parent is experiencing in the moment that we can support them on? And organically, you build a relationship that then transitions into bigger conversations about other issues. It might start with the bathroom, like I think that's what Alex used as an example. And from there, you recognize, wait a minute, like this, as a parent, the bathroom issue is connected to funding issues that are connected to how we fund schools. And there's a whole bunch of connective tissue there that we're helping parents link to other parents in our network as it's grown. Now it's not as, do we show up and we still do that kind of work, but we have a network now, 8 years in, of parents that are getting other parents engaged. So it's a little bit of both today.
That's fantastic. Well, you also get points because you're the only person on this call who's rocking a T-shirt with the name of his organization. So
I don't have that fancy background. I just have my basement. So
So we got to look at your T-shirt, and you're doing a great job with that. Dwanisha, thanks so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about Faith Acts and what you've heard in this conversation that sort of connects to or illuminates what you all are doing in Connecticut.
So much, and I can't absorb all of the time that we have with those two questions, so I'll try to keep it brief. In Black and Brown communities across this country, particularly Black and Latinx folks, we know church to be the center of not only our faith, but very organic and natural community organizing. And so when our founding executive director, Jamila Prince Stewart, started Faith Acts for Education, she did it without a roadmap or a plan, but as a girl born and raised in New Haven, Connecticut, who understood the acute experiences of the community that she grew up in. And almost 10 years later, we turned 10 on February 16, 2025. We are still in this work with over 100 churches across 8 different denominations and about 11,000 congregants. And what that means is that if politicians are going to roll up in our churches and ask us for our vote around election time, and at the same time, we have heard all in through this call that we are having disputes about where power exists and where it lies and who has it and who does it, Faith Acts knows that our power is in our vote. And so we are going to hold our politicians accountable in the same ways they come to us. In Connecticut, that looks like coming to Bridgeport, New Haven, and Hartford, when you need the community to come and show up and show out. That accountability has locally led to things like infusing $1 million in local school boards. And most recently, $150 million was our last legislative win to get additional education dollars in the budget. And we are so thrilled, but it's also a lot of work, which leads to some of what I heard and what I was excited about on the call, in that this work is taxing. There's not a single person on my team who is more than one generation removed from the problems that we are advocating for. which means that when we are in these boardrooms and in these seats, there's likely someone living in our home who is going to be a direct beneficiary or suffering the consequence of what we do every day. And that weight is heavy and it is hard. I think something I haven't heard yet and would be interested for us to explore at some point is that for many of us, me included, we are through this work getting the justice that we didn't receive when we ourselves were in these very same school buildings. We are interacting within the communities that we served, and this is not work that we come to do and can almost see in an abstract or an othering, but this is work that we are very intimately a part of and are living out. And so I am thrilled. This is heavy work. I'm proud for Faith Acts to be among this group, and just excited for the conversation.
No, those are really, really, really interesting and important comments. I think we're going to come back to those in just a moment. Bridget, let me bring you in. Georgia is one of the key partners to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And I'm really curious to hear about how you think about this from a state level. We just heard two examples from community level. How do you think about this sitting in your seat at the Georgia Department of Early Learning?
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation and realize that I am kind of coming at it from a different angle. There's a lot going on across the state in Georgia, and our agency kind of comes at it from the very beginning. And what we're really looking to do is to encourage families and early care and learning providers to understand that those early years are so critical, and that that really helping families to understand their power and to understand the importance of being engaged. As I think it was Joanne said, you know, that being those first teachers for their children, and helping to empower them in that way as much as they can. One thing that we've done at DeCal is created a group of family peer ambassadors. We don't have a whole lot of direct contact with families. Most of our interactions are with early care and learning providers. So we do training and support for them around family engagement. But we've also created a program through the preschool development grant called Family Peer Ambassadors. And so we have recruited family members from all across the state. I think I saw that a couple of them are on here today, so I have to give
Fantastic.
a shout out to them.
Great.
And they're amazing, powerful people who come in from a variety of different places, backgrounds, all kinds of wonderful things. And what they do is they go out to events in their communities and they just share information about resources. So we've given them the information to kind of get them started, and then they go out and they give that peer-to-peer support to families and really help them to understand why those early years are so important and what's so important about quality early care and learning, why they need to be asking those questions to make sure that their children are in environments that are going to help prepare them for school. And at our agency, we partner with lots of different nonprofits that support early language, early literacy. They offer different opportunities, but we really work to try to keep that family voice out there first. So the things that kind of rang true for me with the Bellwether report and what Alex was talking about was the real important part. The important part was providing that leadership training and that background, that giving them that information. Again, that foundation of why is it important? You know, we have ambassadors who are lawyers. We have ambassadors who are, you know, physicians. They come to us from a whole different areas of study, and they may not fully understand the importance of those first 5 years. And so really kind of giving them that background information, but also information about leadership to kind of recognize themselves as leaders in their communities. You know, they picked up a flyer in their childcare program and said, hey, this looks cool, possibly. And then, you know, really to kind of see themselves as leaders and help build those skills with them. And then the other piece that really rang true to me is the importance of us remaining flexible and helping to give that power over to the ambassadors. So as we're in our 4th year now, and we have 4 cohorts of ambassadors that we've brought through the program. We have 45 ambassadors that are active right now, And as we've gone through, we've actually created a leadership team called our core ambassadors to help give us feedback and input on the decision making throughout the process. And one of the things, and then listening and making changes. One of the things we heard loud and clear from them in this past year is they needed some identifiers. They needed something when they were out at an event. They needed something to be able to say, hey, this is who I am and this is who I'm with. And so they worked with us to create a logo, and we got them shirts and we got them banners and all, so that they feel legitimate. And that's the feedback we've gotten from them, is that helps them to feel legitimate. So a lot of what Alex said was really kind of rang true to me. Somewhat, as I think it was Joanne or Shana said, you know, ding, ding, ding. Yes, we're doing some of these things. Yay, yes. But also, hey, we've got a lot further to go. There's a lot more that we need to do to help really to build the strength of the families across the state and help them to understand how important it is from the very start.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Bridget. Now, I want to ask everybody to join on screen so we can all have a conversation. And I also want to put out a call for questions. If people have questions, specific or general, put them in the Q&A, and Emily will work with me to get those questions into the stream of conversation. So thanks to everybody. Wow, what a lot we got out of that conversation. I want to come back to you, Alex, and then to others, and I hope you'll all interact with each other on these things. I am curious what you found most surprising. Like, what was different than you anticipated in what you found and what you've come to think about parent engagement?
I think, you know, maybe I'm focusing on funders a little bit, but just how much bias there is towards parents and communities that education philanthropy purports to serve. And the reality is, you know, just to name it, a lot of education philanthropy manifests as well-intentioned white outside missionary work. And if you ask parents and communities, they'll say, look, you don't have to be white to be a well-intentioned outside missionary, but a lot of y'all are, and that includes me. And so I do think there's a lot of reckoning philanthropy has to do to really wrestle with itself in order to fully realize the vision for change they hope for. And that does mean shifting their mindsets about the role of parents and communities in their power and setting the agenda for change. I mean, I'm trying not to be too critical about it, but I think
you can be as critical as you want.
No,
I think you can be as critical as you want. I mean, we want this to be truth-telling and provocative. Daniel, I'm curious, same question. Like, what surprised you as you've gotten into this? What I heard you talking about was really some bad mix of power and prejudice that gave everything a particular flavor that you're trying to change. What surprised you as you got into this work?
I mean, I appreciate Alex's contribution, because when you asked that question, I was like, what would my answer be? And I'd probably start in exactly the same space. And I appreciated what Dwanisha had to share about kind of living our own path, or reliving our own path and our own liberation in a way. It's hard for me not to look at this work every day and think about personal connectivity to it. Like, I can't turn it off. It is both jet fuel and, you know, trauma inducing when you can't turn it off, because you know, people don't necessarily see it the way I see it, or some of us on this, but I think we routinely box out moms and dads of a particular flavor. Black and Latinx moms and dads just don't have the same voice, and we do it almost knee-jerk and so nonchalantly just brush them aside that we don't even realize our racial bias in that. And that is exactly the same thing that is driving what Alex just raised, right? I feel like philanthropy similarly at times is not investing in or valuing parents in the way that we need to, if we really want to see the paradigm shift we need for outcomes to change at scale. They are the most consistent stakeholder in these kids' lives. They are the most capable of changing outcomes for these children. And we have to start to think differently. And that racial bias is a very real hurdle.
That is just super helpful. To follow on that, we have a question from Yulan in the box about bilingual parent communities and what people have found to be successful strategies in engaging people whose first language is not necessarily English. So that affects their own feeling, perhaps, of efficacy and capacity to engage successfully, and also how people hear folks. So what have people seen about bilingual communities? Anybody can answer that.
I'll
Go
take a
ahead,
stab,
Daniel.
John. Okay.
Okay, go ahead. No, go ahead. Shannon, go ahead,
From
and
a-
then
from
we'll
a-
come back to
From a
Daniel.
slightly different perspective, but from a district person who worked very closely with community-based organizations,
Yeah.
what I learned about bilingual engagement and working with families, newcomer and refugee families, is that once engaged, once offered things like, having the appropriate language access and engaging them in ways that were culturally relevant for those families, I experienced some of the most robust and strongest engagement and advocacy I'd ever seen, right? Someone said it earlier, all of our families want what's best for their children, right? And so from a district perspective, I would just offer that I think that all schools as well as districts should ensure that they are honoring that, right? Ensuring that we give families who don't speak English as a first language the access to information that we're giving other families, give them the forum and space to engage and advocate on behalf of their children. And when we do that, I have seen some strong advocacy efforts yield some great results for the community.
Fantastic. Dwanisha, I see your hand up.
I was going to say there's an opportunity for intersection here. So what we've done tactically is make sure we have translation services available for our voter guides and the resources that we provide for our families. And those guides are vetted through folks who actually speak the languages. And in our case, Spanish is a predominant language in the community. And so that is where we gear. I also think there are more practical tools if you're hosting events, if you're trying to understand what the unique needs are of the community, making sure that there's representation of that language. And so the surface level things, I think, end up getting us to and through our own self-interest. But if, like Shana said, if we want intentional involvement, some of that will look like being intentional on how we're allocating resources for inclusivity, and that includes language.
Awesome. Daniel, you go ahead. Go ahead, Joanne, and then Daniel, I want to come back to you.
I'll just comment, and I think Shanna referred to this. It goes beyond language. We're looking at culture and how people live and their expectations. So it's a big deal. And when we start talking about being culturally responsive, we're not only talking about language differences, we are talking about ethnic differences, racial differences, and that all needs to be a part of how we work with parents in our communities.
Thank you. Daniel, you took your hand down, but
yeah, Dwanisha said it. I wasn't gonna
back up.
I wasn't gonna double down on. I'll just double down on what I heard, but Dwanisha kind of said it. I just think you have to meet people where they're at. I think everybody said it, and I think having staff who come from the spaces that we're talking about helps. But even in Chicago right now, like we have an influx of Venezuelan immigrants, and that changes the dynamics in terms of how you have to engage. And everything Joanne just said is right. So we have to find a way to meet people where they're at on their own terms, whether that's ethnic, racial, language differences, or other parents on what works for their timeline.
Alex, anything you want to add from across the different projects you looked at?
No, I think no.
Okay, great. We have an anonymous question, but I think it's speaking for a lot of us on this call, which is how do we make a distinction between the kind of parent power we're talking about today, kind of parent engagement we're talking about today, from what is so prominent right now in sort of this parents' rights, whatever you want to call it. And I want to recognize a name that, it so happens that I disagree with what some people are advocating for in various school districts and so forth. But I also really respect that people are engaging in a major way. So I don't love the way this is being covered. There's just a lot of sort of conflict entrepreneur. Let's have lots of clashes and fights and so forth. But I'm curious for all of you who are so deeply engaged in this and who think about this all the time. How do we draw a distinction, or is there not a distinction between what we read about in the papers all the time, which is, of a particular flavor, and what we don't read about in the papers all the time, which is what all of you are talking about today? And Joanne, I see you smiling, so I want to hear what's inside that smile.
I'll say that this is a very real concern for us at Parents for Public Schools, because our lifeblood is parent engagement. And we believe that some of the things we're seeing today are giving parent engagement a bad name. And there are several things. I'll just mention that, of course, people have the right to have their own views. But when it comes to educating our children, your right stops when mine begins. And so if we're going to be in public school together, it can't be, we can't be bullies with one another. There has to be discussion, there has to be consensus, and that's not just, and there has to be a recognition that your values that you hold are no better than the values I hold. How do we make those two things lie down together? So where there are rights, there are also responsibilities, and I'll stop there. But it's very worrisome to us, to the extent that we have mounted a campaign to get other like-thinking organizations to join with us to develop a campaign where we can do some pushback against some of the negative parent engagement that we see. And so we're looking forward to see where that takes us. But we'd like to get some national coverage about positive parent engagement rather than burning books and other things. So.
Indeed, that is not exactly how the media is working today, sadly. Dwanisha, I'm curious to hear from you on this, since you're working with the faith community, and there are elements of the faith community who are actually involved in this other part of parent engagement. So how are you striking that balance?
I remember that probably around this time last year, my comms director and I had a similar conversation about the hijacking of faith and what it meant to actually take on a different narrative. And I realized in that we're having two separate conversations. One is a branding conversation, which is where I think in the era of social media, people are looking to win a narrative war. For us, though, when we peel the layers back and we think about this from the lens of community organizing, there's always been a bully, right? There's always been a different bully on the other side of the argument that I think has navigated this work in a different way. And from our perspectives, our values, and similar to what Ms. Joanne just spoke about, our coalitions are the deepest way for us to really come together and talk through and put our perspectives at the forefront. And so to answer the question in the box, my recommendation would be to think through what your coalitions look like and how are your values shining through and evident in every turn, so that there is no people in our spaces here, Faith Acts for Education, and they are not thinking the same things that people are thinking at a national scale about what faith has sort of been co-opted to be in service of some of the SCOTUS policies that we are seeing overturned, for lack of better.
Yeah. Daniel, I see your hand up. And then Alex, I want to come to you because Alex, this is the first this is where you and I started this conversation, which is about our simultaneous enthusiasm for parent power and our concern about the ways that parent power is finding expression that we thought perhaps were not as constructive as we might like. But Daniel, you go first, and then I'm coming to you, Alex.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna throw my hand up when I have a response, but pick on me or not based on. I'm just trying to keep following etiquette here.
No, you go,
for
you
everybody.
go, you
But,
go. No worries.
A couple thoughts. One is if you want to see where our bias is, look at how the media reports on this. So Joanne, I hear your point, like getting a national kind of coverage. Parents are not monolithic in pretty much anything. And for democracy to work, like you need to talk to all of them and not spend all your energy focusing on the fringes. That's part one. I think I saw a quote in the Tamara like said something about political agendas to me, like political agendas with a parent face is just tokenizing. It's just another format of the agenda getting kind of slotted in and putting someone else in as their front runner for it so that you can try to convince people everybody's thinking a certain way. But I think more fundamentally, like we're fighting a fight in Chicago, allowing parents to decide what happens in their own backyards, not other people's backyards. And when I think about like this group, like Moms for Liberty, other groups, there's progressive groups and conservative groups that do the same thing, the Black and brown moms and dads all day long. They show up and they say, this is the best way for you to do your schooling. We're going to use all the tools in the toolbox to politically play this game. We're never going to have a conversation with you about what happens in your own backyard. And that is very much what I see happening and who's getting the media airtime versus let's actually have a conversation about how we let the people that live in this particular space determine how and what's happening in their own schools.
Yeah. Alex, this is where we started. So I'm curious, and that was a while ago. So I'm curious how your thinking has evolved and how you square up these different notions of parent power.
I think what Daniel and Duanisha shared is sort of fundamental about, and Joanne as well, like where do things start, where do they end? And I find myself personally wrestling with it. I mean, one, I think some people feel like communities should be this monolithic single voice, but that's not how communities work. I mean, heck, my stepdaughter and my significant other and I can't agree on what to watch on Netflix on Friday. It's just three of us. But I think a lot of people expect communities to be monolithic and consensus, and I think that is not realistic. But then we get into it, and there will be a diversity of voices and perspectives and values and opinions in any given community, even before we deal with people from the outside trying to impose that on a community.
Yep.
And I don't think it's about silencing any voice. I mean, if someone has a voice, they have a right to it. What I am focused on, I think everyone here is really driving progress on, is how do we support the people who have historically never had a voice, who have been actively disenfranchised from having a voice, and making sure that they have equal say at that table. And yes, that means it's a messy rugby scrum of democracy, but that's what we should be aiming for. That's the only way we're going to have, the ability for everyone to lay out their pieces. Now, I think where it gets more complicated is if we are successful and parents in the communities we care about are able to do this more, we are likely to have more atomization and fragmentation of what is taught. And I'm not sure that I think that's a bad thing. People are realizing coming out of COVID more than ever, they want to have a say in what's, being taught to the kids. But the challenge is the same right that gives a family the ability to send their kids to Reconstruction, an amazing web-based resource that's an unapologetically Black education, is going to be the same rights and freedom that allow someone to send their kid to a very conservative school that teaches things I might not agree with. And if we're going to raise up the rights for the first one, we are then raising up the rights to the second one. The challenge is we need guardrails. And I don't know what the guardrails are. So like teaching there are two sides of the Holocaust, or teaching that Black people learn marketable skills in slavery, those are outside my guardrails. Having a neo-Nazi homeschooling network in Ohio, which was busted, earlier this summer, is outside my guardrail. But I'm also very aware as an individual, as soon as I impose my guardrails, I'm giving license for people to also do that. So I don't have a perfect answer. I do think one way to thread that needle, though, is back to Joanne's point, which is who's trying to fight for the rights for their children versus who's trying to fight for the right to impose their values on other people's children. And I think that is not always a perfect line, but it's a pretty good barometer of where different people are in terms of the spectrum of what I support or not.
So I just want to jump in here because there's a really interesting question that goes right to what you're saying. And it's, what do you recommend in terms of making clear how parent power, the way you're talking about it, differs from partisan parent rights? Like, what is the right messaging? Joanne touched on this too. So if you could just keep going with that and answer that question, that'd be great.
I'm much more interested in hearing what others, Joanna,
Okay.
please.
Or Joanne, yeah.
I'll just say that our focus at PPS is public schools. And if you choose, and I didn't comment on the fact that Alex had that choice word in his presentation, but if you choose, and if it's right for your family to send your child to a conservative or progressive or reactionary school, that is definitely within your rights as a parent. But I believe that our public schools are essential as a means to bring us together as a nation, as a society.
Mhm.
I'm an old history teacher, and one of the one of the topics I loved was the rise of nation states and the difference between nation states and empires and kingdoms. And it's a real watershed in history, the rise of these nation states and what made them nations and what held them together as nations. Public education, that is our kids going into these places and getting similar types of education wherever they were, it's a means of holding this country together. It's a means of establishing some guide rails and some fundamentals for our society. Now, if we're going to have all these different enclaves where my kid's here and we're doing this and we're hiding in the mountains and we're in the caves and we're teaching, then we are, maybe unwittingly or unintentionally, we are destroying the structure of this nation. And I think we need to become awake to that we are destroying the underpinnings of this nation if we don't find a way to educate ourselves together.
Well, very, very well said. Okay, here comes our engagement poll. We really want people to answer. It doesn't have to interrupt our conversation, but please fill out the poll. Emily, did you want to pose one more question? Because I have one more also. But go ahead.
There's a bunch of questions here, John, so we might want to let the audience questions come in. This was actually answered by Bridget, but I think it's a good question for conversation. In your work, how might workplaces, this is from Vanessa Nardi, how might workplaces help with parent involvement? Are there ways to work with business community to support parent employees? You talked about, I think Alex mainly talked about this, but like scheduling things at the right times, honoring working parents, but what about their workplaces? How are you engaging them?
I can actually take that, and I take this as a new mom. And so all deference to the mothers who've been doing this for longer than 2 years. But I want to give a shout out to an organization, not on this list, but called Moms First. And they are leading incredible work around a Marshall Plan for mothers. When we talk about capitalism in this country and the way capitalism manifests, there's an undue burden on mothers because of what we have historically known as a woman's place in the household, right? And how the disproportionate amount of work and around community organizing directly and indirectly falls on mothers. What I will say is that some of the things that I've sought to implement in our workplace are the flexibility for people to show up for issues that matter to them during the workday. That means advocating for their own children and other people's children. And so to the degree that businesses can step in, I would invite you to look at Moms First and that what they are calling the Marshall Plan for Mothers, because there are a number of policies that we can very quickly implement without waiting on the powers that be, to think through what it looks like to give mothers, fathers, and caregivers, because so many of our children are not raised by their biological parents, and that is a dynamic that we have to interrogate as well. But there's room for us to really think through how we show up for people and allow them to incorporate their home lives into their work lives so that they are not having to see this as one thing or another. The final thing that I'll say is provide childcare at your programs. Like, there are so many organizations that show up and offer space. I went to a gala a couple of weeks ago by a community organizing organization, and in the banquet hall, they booked a separate room so that someone could come and watch the kids of the people who were attending. And in that room, along with the professional folks that they had there, they paid teenagers in the community to be additional oversight for the children. And my daughter was in that room. And so I would offer that the things that you think you need, other people need as well, and offer them and incorporate them into your organization.
Oh, that's fantastic. Anybody else want to comment on that?
There's another great question here that I'd like to get to too. This is from Yulin Milliken. How do you handle it when you've got parents who speak multiple languages? Do you still do like, the programming all together? Do you do it separately? Do you have translators? How do you do that when you've got bilingual parent community or multilingual?
Jump in again. I think whether it's community or schools or faith-based, that we be prepared, right? We recognize the languages that our families represent. We ensure that, yes, there are translators, that just as Danisha said, there's childcare, that even the food and things are culturally relevant, and we are respectful of all the cultural norms of our families. But in regards to programming, like even back to school programs, I have seen schools, entertain and engage with groups of families that speak maybe 5 to 6, 10, 12 languages at a time. And it can look to some like, mass hysteria, but it is a beautiful sight to see because, folks have their headsets on, you see the translators there, then there was, maybe someone facilitating from the front, but like I said, for someone who believes in this work and believes in the power of engagement, it is a beautiful sight to see. And so I would just offer that, regardless of who the host is, right, that we prepare, that we do our research and acknowledge what the community needs to be successful, and adhere to that. Resource it.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure we touched on this one yet, but I'm sure you're all doing it, but examples of successful social media campaigns that build parent connection, helps create change, helps them be aware of and build a child skill, especially to be ready for kindergarten.
One thing I can pipe in really quickly is, the CDC has created their Learn the Signs Act Early program, which is a set of developmental milestones for families for children birth to 8, to just give them an idea of what are some of the things to expect at different ages, but also to give them tools for communication with others about their child's development. And on there, they have all the tips and activities for families to help them understand how to encourage their child's development at that age. So that's just kind of something very basic. They actually have an app that you can download. It's called the CDC Milestone Tracker app. And that's kind of a really easy tool to use to be able to have the language to communicate with others about what's going on with your child's development, which is an important part of empowering families, to have that common language.
I don't know if
Fantastic.
this counts as social
Go
media,
ahead.
but we have a texting program that we're a part of, and 3 days a week, it text messages to parents with tips and information, and it is available in a variety of languages. When the parent signs up for it, they indicate their language, and then the text messaging is sent out. This is a program we are part of. We don't do the translating, but I think it's great. And we know that texting is a way to connect with younger parents as opposed to other forms of social media, other forms of media.
I just have to call time. We could go on, and we will in other sessions, but here we are at 1/2 the hour. And I just want to thank all our guests today. The conversation has been super instructive and energizing. We appreciate all the work that everyone is doing and your willingness to come on and talk with us about it today. Before we sign off, you see on your screen, we have some upcoming events, and I want to put in a special plug for the November 21st session, where we'll dig more deeply into the parent engagement questions with our friends from Learning Heroes. And with that, thanks again to everyone for joining, and from all of us at the campaign, we wish you all a good day.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.